The helicopter disappeared into the gray sky and the sound of its blades faded fast, leaving only rain, thick and endless, and the deep breathing of the Philippine jungle, and in that moment the Indian elite soldiers understood they were truly alone, because no welcome waited for them, no banners, no speeches, no comfort, only men standing still in the rain, barefoot, faces calm, eyes sharp, watching them like hunters who had already studied their prey. And then one Filipino NAVSOG operator stepped forward and spoke softly, saying, "If you stand still too long here, the jungle will decide for you, so move," and that single sentence felt heavier than any shout. These Indian soldiers were not weak men, they were chosen from thousands, trained in ice-cold mountains, burning deserts, and deadly operations where mistakes cost lives, and many believed nothing could surprise them anymore, but as they stepped into the mud, boots sinking deep with each step, rifles wet, packs heavier than planned, they felt something new crawling into their minds, not fear exactly, but doubt, because the jungle did not feel like land, it felt alive, watching, listening. The NAVSOG instructors did not explain rules, they did not introduce themselves, they simply walked, fast and silent, and the Indians were forced to follow or be left behind, and within minutes sweat mixed with rain, turning uniforms heavy, breathing hard, and the heat rose fast, wrapping around their bodies like a tight grip. One of the Indian officers, a young captain with steady eyes and calm hands, touched the inside of his vest without thinking, checking the folded photo he carried everywhere, his wife smiling in the picture, standing at a train station the day he left, telling him to come back stronger but alive, and he pushed the thought away because this was training, not war, but the jungle did not care about that difference. Suddenly the group stopped at a wide ravine filled with fast-moving brown water, rain-fed and angry, and the NAVSOG commander turned and said there would be no ropes, no tools, no help, and they would cross now, and when one Indian soldier hesitated for just a moment, the commander said nothing at all, simply stared, and that silence burned deeper than anger, forcing the soldier forward, slipping, falling, choking on muddy water as teammates pulled him out on the other side, coughing, shaking, pride wounded but alive, and the jungle remained silent, patient. Within the first hour, watches were taken, maps removed, food packs opened and emptied, and the commander spoke again, saying time no longer mattered here, hunger would teach them, and the jungle would decide who deserved to learn, and some of the Indian soldiers exchanged quick looks, realizing this was not a friendly exchange program, this was a test of spirit. As daylight faded, they were pushed deeper into thicker terrain, crawling under roots, climbing slippery slopes, cutting through vines with bare hands, insects biting exposed skin, leeches clinging unnoticed until blood appeared, and still the NAVSOG operators moved smoothly, quietly, like shadows that never slipped, and that difference hurt more than fatigue. Night arrived suddenly, dark and loud, filled with unknown screams and movements that felt close enough to touch, and there was no rest, only short halts before being pushed again, and when one Indian soldier whispered that this felt like punishment, another replied that punishment usually ends, and this did not feel like it would. Cold settled in as rain soaked everything, and the young captain watched one NAVSOG instructor kneel, strike a blade against stone, and start a small fire using wet wood while rain fell hard, the flame steady like it belonged there, and then without a word the instructor crushed it under his boot and walked away, leaving the Indians cold, shivering, trying again and again until hands shook and hope thinned. Pride began to crack quietly, not loudly, as hours passed without food or rest, and some men started to question themselves, not out loud but deep inside, and that was when the jungle began its real work, stripping away titles and ranks, leaving only human beings trying to endure. Near dawn, one soldier collapsed from exhaustion, knees giving out, face pressed into mud, and the group froze for a second, waiting for help that did not come, and the NAVSOG commander only said if he can breathe he can move, and somehow the man stood again, eyes empty, body shaking, carried forward by something he could not name. As the sky slowly lightened, the young captain felt the weight of the photo in his chest grow heavier, love turning into fear, fear into determination, because he refused to let the jungle decide his story, and yet as they moved forward again, deeper into green shadows, a quiet truth settled among them all, that this was only the beginning, and whatever waited ahead would test not just their bodies, but everything they believed about themselves, their brothers, and the meaning of survival. The second day did not announce itself with sunlight or birds, it arrived with pain, because sleep never truly came, only short blackouts between movement and orders, and when the Indian soldiers opened their eyes, ants crawled over their skin, rainwater filled the shallow ground where they had collapsed, and muscles screamed in protest as they stood again, and before anyone could fully wake, the NAVSOG instructors were already moving, signaling silently, pushing them deeper into jungle that grew thicker, darker, and more unforgiving with every step. Hunger began to speak now, not loudly but constantly, a dull ache that distracted the mind and weakened the legs, and thirst followed close behind, turning saliva thick and swallowing painful. And when one Indian soldier finally asked when they would eat, the NAVSOG commander replied calmly that food comes after learning, and learning comes after suffering, and then he turned and kept walking. The terrain changed without warning, from muddy slopes to sharp limestone hidden under leaves, cutting boots and skin, and one soldier slipped badly, striking his knee against stone, a sharp cry escaping before he could stop it, and immediately he went silent, ashamed, but the NAVSOG instructors did not mock him, they did something worse, they ignored the pain completely, forcing him to rise and move, and every step after that became a quiet battle between pride and agony. Hours passed with no sense of time because watches were gone and the jungle blocked the sun, and slowly the Indian unit began to spread out, not by choice but by exhaustion, men slowing at different rates, some pushing ahead out of stubbornness, others lagging behind as strength faded, and the jungle took advantage of every mistake, swallowing sound, bending direction, making footsteps echo from places that made no sense. At one point the young captain realized he could no longer hear two of his men behind him, and a cold fear slid into his chest, because soldiers are trained never to lose their own, and he turned back instinctively, but a NAVSOG instructor blocked his path, shaking his head once, slowly, and saying if you turn back now, you fail forward and backward, and the captain froze, torn between duty and command, and that moment stayed with him, burning quietly as he forced himself to move on. The heat climbed higher as the day stretched on, turning the jungle into a steaming cage, and bodies began to fail in small ways, hands shaking when lifting rifles, vision narrowing, thoughts slowing, and one soldier began muttering softly to himself, repeating his son's name like a prayer, until another nudged him hard and told him to focus, because losing the mind here was more dangerous than losing the body. When they finally stopped, it was not for rest but for another lesson, and the NAVSOG commander pointed to a stretch of ground crawling with movement, snakes sliding through leaves, insects swarming in the air, and said they would cross slowly, calmly, without killing anything unless necessary, and fear rippled through the Indian group, because training usually prepares you to fight threats, not coexist with them, and now they had to step carefully, breathing slow, controlling panic, trusting their senses instead of overpowering them. One soldier panicked when something brushed his ankle and jumped back sharply, and in seconds the jungle reacted, branches snapping, birds exploding into flight, noise everywhere, and the commander raised a hand, stopping them all, saying quietly that the jungle listens, and now it knows you are afraid, and that sentence followed them long after they moved on. As evening approached, rain returned heavier than before, soaking everything again, and the cold crept in fast, stealing warmth from tired bodies, and the NAVSOG instructors finally allowed a halt, but there was no shelter, no fire, no food, only orders to observe and learn, and as darkness fell, the jungle grew louder, closer, more alive, sounds circling them, testing nerves already stretched thin. The young captain sat with his back against a tree, knees drawn close, pressing the photo inside his vest again, thinking of his wife's smile, of warmth and light far away, and for the first time he wondered if love made him stronger or weaker here, because every memory of home now felt like both fuel and pain. Nearby, one of the injured soldiers' knee had swollen badly and he tried to hide it, jaw clenched, because quitting was unthinkable, but the NAVSOG commander noticed everything, and he approached quietly, kneeling beside the man, saying nothing, simply placing 2 fingers against the swollen joint, pressing hard, and the soldier gasped, tears forming despite himself, and the commander finally spoke, saying pain teaches truth, and truth keeps you alive, and then he moved away, leaving the lesson burning. That night, tragedy brushed close but did not fully strike, when a sudden movement in the dark caused one soldier to raise his rifle in panic, finger tight on the trigger, and another knocked the barrel down just in time, heart pounding, realizing how close fear had come to killing brother instead of enemy, and silence followed, heavy and ashamed, broken only by rain. By the time dawn began to glow faintly through the leaves, something had changed in the Indian soldiers. Pride had not vanished, but it had softened, reshaped into something quieter and more dangerous, respect, because they now understood this training was not about proving strength, it was about stripping away everything false, and as they stood to move again, bodies weaker but minds sharper, none of them yet realized that the hardest test, the one that would leave everyone truly speechless, had not even begun. The third day began with separation, not announced, not explained, just done, because after hours of movement through tight jungle corridors where roots formed walls and branches cut faces, the NAVSOG instructors suddenly vanished one by one, slipping into the green without sound, and before the Indian soldiers could react, the commander's voice echoed once, saying you are now alone, find each other before the jungle finds you, and then even his presence disappeared, leaving silence so deep it felt unreal. Panic tried to rise immediately, sharp and fast, but training forced it down, and the young captain dropped to one knee, listening, smelling the air, scanning for movement, realizing too late that the unit had been scattered farther apart than he thought, and calling out would only make things worse because the jungle punished noise. Hunger now burned constantly, no longer a dull ache but a sharp reminder with every breath, and thirst made lips crack and tongues swell, and when the captain found a small stream, he hesitated, remembering warnings about parasites, then drank anyway because survival does not wait for perfect choices. One by one he found his men, not by sight but by signs, disturbed leaves, broken branches, shallow footprints, and each reunion felt less like relief and more like urgency, because every minute lost felt like the jungle tightening its grip. They moved carefully, slowly, and then the jungle struck without warning, when a sudden cry echoed to their left, raw and full of pain, and the captain's heart dropped, because that was one of his own, and when they reached him they found the soldier pale and shaking, blood running down his arm from deep scratches, eyes wide, saying something grabbed him, something strong, and no one laughed because fear in that jungle did not need proof. The captain made a quick decision, tearing cloth to bind the wound, forcing the man to breathe slowly, reminding him he was not alone, and in that moment love showed itself in a new form, not soft or gentle, but firm and steady, the kind that holds men together when fear tries to pull them apart. As they moved again, rain returned like a curse, turning the ground into sliding traps, and the injured soldier slowed them all, guilt heavy in his eyes, whispering that he should be left behind, and the captain stopped him sharply, saying no one gets left here, and the words felt heavy, because he did not know if they were true, only that he needed to believe them. Near midday, NAVSOG returned suddenly, not to help, but to test again, appearing from the jungle like ghosts, surrounding the Indian group silently, weapons raised but fingers off triggers, and the commander stepped forward, eyes unreadable, and asked a single question, would you abandon one to save many? And before anyone could answer, he ordered them to move fast, dragging the injured man along, and the test continued without pause. Exhaustion turned brutal now, legs shaking uncontrollably, vision blurring at the edges, and one soldier stumbled badly, tumbling down a short slope, hitting his head hard against a tree, and when they reached him, he did not move at first, and for one terrifying moment time stopped because this was training, not war, but death does not respect the difference. And when he finally groaned and opened his eyes, relief came sharp and painful, mixed with anger at how close they had come to losing. That night, tragedy finally stepped closer, when the injured soldier's breathing changed, becoming shallow and uneven, fever burning through him, infection setting in fast in the wet heat, and the captain stayed beside him, holding his shoulder, whispering steady words, thinking of his wife again, of promises made, of lives connected far beyond this jungle, and he felt a deep, quiet fear, not of dying, but of failing the men who trusted him. The NAVSOG commander watched silently from a distance, saying nothing, letting the situation unfold, and the Indian soldiers realized then that this training was not about passing or failing, it was about revealing truth under pressure. And as dawn approached once more, the injured soldier's fever broke slightly, enough to keep him alive, but everyone knew they were walking a thin line now, and that the jungle had not yet taken its payment. The fourth day came with a strange calm, the kind that feels wrong before something breaks, and the jungle seemed quieter, as if it was holding its breath, and the Indian soldiers moved slowly now, not because they were careful, but because their bodies were reaching limits they had never touched before, muscles torn and aching, feet raw and bleeding inside soaked boots, minds foggy from hunger and sleeplessness, yet still they moved, because stopping felt more dangerous than going on. NAVSOG led them to a wide clearing where fallen trees lay tangled like bones, and for the first time since arriving the commander allowed them to sit, but the relief lasted only seconds before he spoke, saying today you will learn what the jungle gives and what it takes, and with that he ordered them to spread out and find food using nothing but what surrounded them. The Indian soldiers searched desperately, memories of training manuals mixing with instinct, pulling insects from bark, digging for roots, catching small frogs, forcing themselves to eat despite disgust, and hunger erased pride quickly, turning survival into a simple, brutal need. One soldier gagged as he swallowed something still twitching, eyes watering, and another laughed weakly, the sound breaking tension for just a moment, reminding them they were still human, still brothers even here. The young captain found a cluster of edible plants he recognized from brief lessons, and he shared them without thinking, dividing what little there was evenly, and in that small act, love showed itself again, quiet and powerful, because leadership here was not about orders, but about care under pressure. But the jungle demanded balance, and tragedy answered soon, when a sudden shout cut through the clearing, sharp and desperate, and they turned to see one soldier convulsing on the ground, foam at his lips, eyes rolled back, body stiff, and fear surged instantly, because poison was a constant threat here, and they realized too late he had eaten the wrong plant. Chaos tried to take control, but NAVSOG did not step in. They watched, silent, forcing the Indians to act alone, and the captain dropped beside the man, remembering fragments of training, forcing the jaw open, turning him on his side, praying his memory was enough, and minutes stretched into forever as the convulsions slowed, then stopped, and when the soldier finally gasped, sucking air violently, relief crashed through the group so hard some men cried openly, not caring who saw. That moment changed everything because they understood now that survival here was not heroic. It was fragile, hanging by thin threads of knowledge, luck, and teamwork, and no one was invincible. As they moved again, heavier in spirit, the injured soldier from before stumbled badly, his fever returning, strength fading fast, and he collapsed completely, unable to rise, eyes glassy, whispering apologies that cut deeper than any wound, and the group froze, because now the question asked earlier returned with force: would you abandon one to save many? The captain knelt beside him, heart pounding, knowing there were no good answers, only consequences, and he looked up at the NAVSOG commander, whose face showed nothing, no permission, no guidance, only expectation. The captain made his choice, ordering 2 men to lift the fallen soldier, redistributing weight, slowing the group even more, and something unspoken passed between the Indian soldiers then, a bond forged not by strength but by refusal to let go, even if it cost them all. The jungle punished them for that decision immediately, rain crashing down hard, trails disappearing, progress turning painfully slow, and by nightfall, exhaustion crushed them nearly flat, and as darkness wrapped around them again, the fallen soldiers' breathing weakened further, each breath shallow and uncertain, and the captain held his hand, thinking of his wife, of love that waits and love that stays, and for the first time he felt anger, real anger, not at NAVSOG, not at the jungle, but at fate itself, because some tests felt too cruel to be called lessons. Near dawn, the fallen soldier stopped breathing for a long moment, and time froze, heart stopping with it, until suddenly he gasped again weakly, alive but barely, and that thin sound cut through the darkness like a knife, reminding them how close tragedy truly was, and as light slowly returned to the jungle, every man there knew that whatever happened next would break something forever. May I continue? Show less. The 5th day began with loss, not sudden, not dramatic, but slow and cruel, because the injured soldier who had been carried through mud and rain finally slipped away just as the jungle began to glow with early light, his chest rising once more and then not again, and the captain felt it before he accepted it, the stillness too complete, the weight in his hands no longer resisting, and for a long moment no one spoke, because training does not prepare men for the quiet after hope dies. The rain softened strangely then, as if the jungle itself paused, and one of the Indian soldiers whispered the man's name, voice breaking, while another closed the dead soldier's eyes with shaking fingers, and love filled the space where strength could not reach, raw and painful, because this was not combat, there was no enemy to blame, only endurance pushed too far. NAVSOG finally moved, not rushing, not apologizing, and the commander knelt once, checking for signs of life he already knew were gone, then stood and said quietly that the jungle had taken its lesson, and those words burned deep, because they were true and merciless. There was no burial, no ceremony, only a brief moment where the captain pressed the fallen man's dog tags into his palm, promising silently they would go home, and then the order came to move, because the jungle does not wait for grief. The Indian soldiers moved differently now, slower but more connected, every step aware of weight not just on backs but in hearts, and the captain felt leadership change inside him, hardening and softening at the same time, because he understood now that love for his men would hurt him no matter what choices he made, and that pain was the price of command. Later that day, NAVSOG led them to a river wide and violent, water rushing fast over rocks sharp as knives, and the commander said nothing except pointing across, and exhaustion screamed in every body, but no one argued because after death, fear of discomfort felt small. Crossing was chaos, men slipping, packs dragged under, one soldier swept briefly off his feet before being grabbed by 2 others, and for a terrifying second the river tried to claim another, but teamwork won, arms locking, bodies anchoring, and when they reached the far side, gasping and shaking, something fierce rose among them, not pride but resolve, because they had refused to lose anyone else. That night, something unexpected happened, something no one had planned for, when one NAVSOG operator quietly handed the captain a small portion of food, barely enough for a few bites, and said nothing, and the captain understood without words that this was not kindness, it was respect, earned in blood and stubborn loyalty, and he shared the food immediately, dividing it without hesitation, because survival meant nothing if it broke who they were. Sleep came in broken pieces, haunted by memories of the fallen soldier's last breath, and the captain dreamed of his wife standing alone at the train station, her smile gone, waiting for a man who never returned, and he woke with his face wet, unsure if it was rain or tears, and in that moment love felt heavier than his pack, heavier than grief. The sixth morning approached with new energy from NAVSOG, because now the training shifted again, becoming faster, sharper, focused on movement and reaction, ambush drills in tight jungle paths, sudden contact simulations using sound and shadow, and the Indian soldiers, despite exhaustion, surprised themselves, reacting cleaner, thinking faster, moving as one unit, and NAVSOG noticed, eyes narrowing with approval they did not show openly. During one drill, the captain was paired against a NAVSOG operator in a simulated close fight, mud and rain making footing useless, and for long seconds they struggled silently, breath against breath, until the Filipino operator finally tapped the captain's chest lightly and stepped back, nodding once, and that small gesture felt larger than any medal. But tragedy does not disappear after it strikes once. It lingers, waiting, and later that day, a sudden storm hit harder than any before, trees bending, rain falling sideways and visibility dropping to nothing, and in the chaos one Indian soldier slipped down a steep slope, vanishing from sight with a cry that cut off too fast, and panic surged instantly, every man moving at once, ignoring orders, scrambling toward the sound, because no one would be left behind again. They found him wedged between rocks, leg twisted badly, pain written across his face, but alive, and relief exploded through them, mixed with fear of what came next, because carrying another injured man now felt impossible, and the captain looked at his men, seeing the question in every eye, how much more can we give? NAVSOG watched closely, saying nothing, letting the decision form, and once again the captain chose burden over abandonment, ordering a rotation carry, changing positions every few minutes, forcing progress inch by inch, and that decision nearly broke them all, but it also sealed something permanent between the two units. When night fell, NAVSOG finally intervened, not with praise, not with comfort, but with extraction for the injured soldier only, lifting him out by rope and helicopter light, and as the sound faded, the commander turned to the Indians and said quietly that many units talk about brotherhood, few live it when it costs them everything, and silence followed, heavy and complete. As the Indian soldiers collapsed onto the wet ground, bodies shaking, hearts raw, the captain looked up through the rain-soaked canopy and felt something shift inside him, grief still sharp, love still heavy, but now joined by a deep understanding that this jungle had stripped them down to truth, and that the final days ahead would demand payment not just in strength, but in identity itself. The sixth day arrived carrying weight instead of shock, because nothing surprised them anymore, pain had become normal, hunger familiar, fear controlled but never gone, and the Indian soldiers rose slowly from the ground like old men trapped in young bodies, joints stiff, eyes sunken, faces thinner, yet something unbreakable sat behind those eyes now, something forged by loss and refusal. NAVSOG did not waste time, pushing them into motion immediately, leading them into terrain that felt deliberately cruel, steep ridges slick with rain, narrow paths above sudden drops, and movement became a careful negotiation between balance and collapse, and every misstep felt final. The captain noticed how his men moved differently now, spacing tighter, hands ready, eyes scanning not just for threats but for weakness in each other, because they had learned the cost of looking away. Midday brought the most brutal test yet, when NAVSOG stopped them at a wide stretch of jungle with no visible trail and announced they would conduct evasion training, meaning they would be hunted, and before the words fully settled, the instructors disappeared again, leaving the Indians with one instruction, move smart or be caught, and the jungle immediately felt smaller, closer, alive with danger. The group split instinctively into smaller elements, slipping through foliage, masking tracks, slowing breath, remembering every lesson learned the hard way, and fear sharpened their minds, turning exhaustion into focus, and when distant sounds echoed, branches snapping softly, they froze together, hearts pounding in silence, realizing the hunters were close. One by one, Indian soldiers were tapped out, NAVSOG operators appearing from nowhere, hands touching shoulders gently but firmly, removing them without sound, and each capture felt like a personal failure, cutting deep, until only the captain and two others remained, crouched in thick undergrowth, mud coating their skin, breath shallow, bodies screaming to move but minds holding them still. Love showed itself again in that moment, when one of the remaining soldiers deliberately shifted position, drawing attention, allowing himself to be taken so the captain could slip away, and the captain wanted to protest, to stop him, but understood instantly what was being given, and that sacrifice burned deeper than pain. The captain moved alone now, deeper into the jungle, every sense stretched, every memory alive, hearing his wife's voice in his head telling him to survive, feeling the weight of fallen comrades and living brothers alike, and when he finally felt a hand close around his wrist from behind, steady and controlled, he did not fight because he knew the test was over. NAVSOG gathered them again as the sun dipped low, and for the first time since arrival the commander spoke at length, saying, "Strength brings you here, but choice reveals who you are, and the jungle only listens to truth." And the Indian soldiers stood silent, mud-covered, hollow-eyed, absorbing every word like it mattered, because it did. That night, something rare happened. NAVSOG allowed fire, small and controlled, and warmth spread slowly, painfully across aching bodies, and around that flame, without speeches, without ceremony, two elite units shared silence. And in that silence respect grew fully formed. The captain stared into the fire, thinking of the fallen soldier, of promises unfulfilled, of love waiting far away, and he understood now that tragedy does not weaken love, it sharpens it, makes it demand meaning. The seventh day approached quietly, carrying a different energy, not softer but resolved, and NAVSOG led them to the final challenge at dawn, a long movement through mixed terrain that would test everything learned: navigation, endurance, teamwork, and will, and there would be no correction, no second chances, only outcome. The Indian soldiers moved as one now, pain ignored, minds locked, decisions shared without words, and when obstacles appeared, they solved them together, lifting, pulling, guiding, refusing to let anyone fall behind, and NAVSOG followed silently, watching closely, no longer testing but observing. Near the end, as fatigue reached a breaking point, the captain stumbled badly, vision narrowing, knees buckling, and immediately hands were on him, his men holding him up, forcing him forward, reversing roles without hesitation. And in that moment he felt love so strong it hurt, because leadership had come full circle, no longer command but trust. When they finally reached the extraction point, the jungle opened suddenly, light spilling through, and helicopters waited, rotors still, and NAVSOG stopped them just short, and the commander stepped forward, looking at each Indian soldier carefully, and said quietly that many arrive here strong, few leave changed, and fewer still leave worthy, and then he saluted, slow and deliberate, and the moment froze, because elite rarely salute elite without reason. As the Indian soldiers stood there, battered, grieving, bonded, something unspoken passed between the two forces, an understanding that could not be trained or taught, only earned, and as the rotors began to spin and the jungle wind rose once more, the captain pressed the photo inside his vest again, tears finally free, knowing he would return home forever altered, carrying loss, carrying love, carrying a truth carved by rain, mud, and brotherhood. The final days did not feel like an ending, they felt like a long exhale after holding breath for too long, because even as the helicopters lifted them briefly away and set them down again for the last stretch, the jungle refused to release its grip easily, and the Indian soldiers stepped back into the green with bodies that felt hollowed out but minds sharper than ever, knowing this was the last measure, the quiet judgment after all the noise. NAVSOG no longer chased them, no longer tested openly, they simply watched from a distance, allowing the Indians to move on their own, and that freedom felt heavier than orders, because now every mistake would belong fully to them. The captain felt it most clearly, the absence of pressure replacing itself with responsibility, because leadership without oversight is the truest test, and he moved carefully, checking each man, adjusting pace, reading faces, sensing when someone needed a hand before they asked, because words were no longer necessary. Hunger still burned, pain still lived in every joint, but those things had become background noise, and what remained was something quieter and stronger, a shared rhythm, a deep understanding built through suffering, loss, and refusal to quit. Along the way they passed places that felt familiar now, ravines once terrifying, streams once desperate, slopes once deadly, and each landmark carried memory, reminding them how far they had been pushed and how much had been taken. And one soldier paused briefly at a clearing, whispering the name of the man they lost, and no one rushed him because some moments are owed respect. Near the end, a final storm rolled in, not violent but steady, rain falling like a curtain, and visibility dropped again, and fatigue tried one last time to drag them down, but no one broke, no one fell because they had already faced worse, and that realization carried them forward. When they finally emerged from the jungle for the last time, there was no dramatic music, no cheering, only NAVSOG standing quietly in formation, faces serious, eyes measuring, and the commander stepped forward slowly, looking at the Indian soldiers not as guests now, not as students, but as equals, and he spoke softly, saying, "This jungle breaks many bodies and reveals many lies, but it showed us your truth, and that truth will stay with you longer than these scars." One by one, the NAVSOG operators approached, shaking hands, brief and firm, eye to eye, and when the commander reached the captain, he held his hand a second longer, saying that leadership proven in suffering is rare, and must be protected, and the captain felt emotion rise hard in his chest, because praise earned this way cuts deeper than medals. As the Indians prepared to leave, the captain took out the dog tags of the fallen soldier one last time, holding them tight, promising again that he would go home, and that his story would not be forgotten, and love filled the space left by grief, painful but strong, because memory is another form of survival. On the flight out, as the jungle shrank beneath them, endless green hiding endless trials, the captain finally unfolded the photo of his wife, looking at her smile through tired eyes, realizing he would return changed, quieter, heavier, but more honest, carrying the jungle inside him forever, and he understood then why everyone had been left speechless, because what happened there could not be explained easily, only lived. The story did not end when they left the jungle, because some battles follow you home quietly, and the Indian soldiers felt it the moment their boots touched clean ground again, when noise returned, when people spoke too loudly, when food was placed in front of them without struggle, and everything felt unreal, too easy, too light compared to what had been carved into them under rain and shadow. The captain stood apart during the closing ceremony, watching flags rise, listening to words that tried to capture something too deep for language, and he kept his hand pressed against his chest where the photo and dog tags rested together now, love and loss sharing the same space, inseparable. NAVSOG stood across from them, faces unreadable, but something had changed there too, because respect had replaced curiosity, and when eyes met, no explanation was needed, only acknowledgement. Later, in quiet moments, the Indian soldiers found themselves waking suddenly at night, listening for jungle sounds that were no longer there, feeling rain that did not fall, and each man carried his own version of the experience, but all shared the same truth, that survival had taught them more than training ever could. The captain finally returned home, stepping off the train at the same station from the photo, and when he saw his wife waiting, her smile breaking as she ran toward him, he felt his knees weaken, because love survived distance, fear, and jungle, and as he held her, he realized he had carried her through every step without knowing it. He told her very little, only that it was hard, only that he lost a brother, only that he came back different, and she understood without asking more because some stories are not meant to be spoken fully. Months later, when young soldiers asked him about the NAVSOG training, about what really happened, about why everyone said even the toughest men returned speechless, he would pause, eyes distant, then say simply that strength is loud until it is tested, and brotherhood is quiet but unbreakable, and the jungle does not care who you are, only who you choose to be when everything is taken away. And somewhere far away, under endless green, the jungle remained unchanged, waiting patiently, holding the echoes of footsteps, pain, sacrifice, and truth, knowing it had done what it always does, revealing not who was strongest but who was real.